Welcome to the podcast where today we're discussing how you and your relationships are influenced by your family of origin. When we work on our relationships and move into counseling, we often work on the symptoms. We're trying to stop the behaviors and the patterns of fear, love, distrust, loyalty, intimacy, communication. But often we need to start working on our relationships with our families of origin. Have you ever noticed that you seem to be living a life that isn't entirely your own? You look at your reactions, your anxieties, the way you pull away or cling in close relationships, and it feels like a script was written for you long before you ever arrived. This is the generational influence on our relationships. It's an invisible signal that we need to know about, a frequency of trauma and behavior that's been broadcasting from your parents, and it's directly in your relationship today. Your parents and their parents, straight into your nervous system. It is more intimate than you could imagine. You don't have to have been abused in the traditional sense to be broken by your family system. Sometimes it's just the quiet, unexamined patterns, the things they didn't say, the ways they didn't show up for you, that leave the deepest scars. And if one partner has a problem with abandonment and rejection, that spark can ignite a firestorm in half a second and can seep into all aspects of your relationship, and no one's the wiser. So today we're going to make sure that we understand and become conscious of our internal family systems, what our generational relationships represent in our relationships today. And in that way, we can free ourselves and free our relationships up. So we call all of this enmeshment. It's where your identity ends and your family expectations begin. And if you don't find the courage to unplug from that upbringing, that family of origin and the way they managed anxiety, you're not going to be able to break free from sabotaging the very love you've been praying for, the one that you asked for, the one that you have now and might not be working in any way, shape, or form like it should. So the desire is there, the intent is good, the partnership could work, but you just can't find the roadmap. We'll find that today. If you don't work on your family of origin, if you don't work on where your behaviors came from, you'll find yourself marrying your father's shadow or your mother's silence. But here's the beautiful truth. The cycle ends pretty easily when we become aware of it. We move past that veil of ignorance and we start to see, hey, hold on a minute. I'm doing what my mother did. I'm using her words that are coming out of my mouth. I swore that I would never do it. Often say so many clients, it's the last thing I ever wanted. I swore I would never be like her. But yet, when I'm not aware, I act like her, and it's affecting my relationship pretty much like she's in it. So the cycle ends when a person is brave enough to look at it. We don't just want to talk about fixing things, we want to talk about differentiation, about becoming a self in a system that wants you to stay a part of it. So that internal family system can be dysfunctional. I always say that all families are dysfunctional. They are by nature. You've got to get out of it in a certain way, and we'll show you how to do that with Bewinian therapy and others. At some point, it's time to stop being an emotional sponge for your ancestors. It's time to come home to yourself. So let's look quickly how we break that cycle. What you need to do is become aware that every thought, feeling, action, behavior, and consequence, every environment, school environment, whether it was boarding school, whether it was an elite school, whether you were a joiner at school, an achiever or a champion, or whether you were a scapegoat, a rebel, uh, it doesn't go away. It forms. I always say 1 + 1 equals what you're experiencing today. It stays very much part of who you are. So that's number one, realizing that what happened then is still happening now. So that's adding it all together. So that differentiation we spoke about is just simply a psychological process of becoming an individual, self actualized, individuated. These are all bigger words for just becoming who you really are. So separating yourself from the way your family used to do anxiety and start managing it in more healthy ways so that you do not spiral into that dysfunction. When you do spiral into that dysfunction, those patterns are going to keep repeating, and your kids will be the ones having to do the work that you could be doing today. So, learning to see your family's drama without taking it into your own body is number one. Then, knowing where your values begin, your personal values, and your parents' expectations end. Those expectations were always there. You just need to dig, you just need to remember, and you'll find them quite easily. And then you've got to break those enmeshment loops, refusing to be an emotional caretaker for people who refuse to heal themselves. So when we show up for ourselves in a relationship and you get two partners doing it, realizing where their behaviors come from, it's an incredible reunion. And things like divorce, separation, lack of communication, no intimacy, all those things fade into the fog of the past. And that's a good thing. So now we know if you don't heal your family of origin issues, you don't pick a right partner. Your trauma picks a partner. And then by doing the inner work of this differentiation, you free yourself to love from a space of wholeness rather than needing to be saved codependently or needing to fix. All early experiences shape your beliefs, behaviors, your attachment styles. Any unresolved childhood issues, which we all have, there's going to always be emotional neglect, conflict that you witnessed. Um, all of these things can create negative subconscious patterns in adult relationships, and they do. They impact on all the dynamics, tone of your relationship. And most people are none the wiser at all that you're sitting arguing with your husband's mother and father and their grandparents. So behaviors are inherited and deep seated thoughts, the way we manage problem solving is inherited. So we go to what I call the conflict sources and start there. And it's actually quite an eye opening experience. And people actually end up through the tears and the trauma of it all, having a good laugh, having this burst of freedom and joy when they realize that those chains were holding them down, chains they never knew were there. So I always say love is a verb. So here's the kicker. How the number one thing that you can do to love your partner and your kids and your family, the number one thing that you can do is love them. And love is action. Love is action. And so it's doing something. And today you can take action. And this is how you do it. This is number one. There's many, many ways, but this is number one. What you want to do is break the bonds of your generational family system, especially the dysfunction in it that doesn't work, and leave it behind so that your kids, your family, and the generations to come don't carry that story on without even knowing it like you once did. So we want to break the bonds of generational influences that have been narcissistic, for example. So if we had a narcissistic parent, and we wouldn't be the wiser, but if we did have a narcissistic parent, they wouldn't feel guilt. It would always be our fault. They would never be wrong. Why? Because a narcissist is always right. And what does that do to an 8-year old child? If the parent's always right and it doesn't make sense, you start burying the feelings of your inadequacy because you don't even know what's right or wrong. So that's an example of breaking familial bonds to the past. Generational programming, generational dysfunction can end with you when you become aware, when you accept it, and then make the decision to innovate, to take new action. And that's what you can do today. It's number one thing you can do to love your partner, love your family. Someone needs to show up and break the trance of the origin family that is in every word we speak, in the actions we make, in the nagging that we might do, in the isolating that we might do, in our lack of intimacy. So, in our family of origin, we could have experienced alcoholic parents, narcissistic parents, parents with anger issues who screamed, shouted, and performed. And when they did that, that was how you thought problems were solved. So, problems are not solved that way. That's why people are in relationship counseling, and they should be, with especially a 52% divorce rate, which is climbing. We're playing roles in a narcissistic theater, and those roles are toxic. We've got to take off the masks that we once wore and break the bonds of that generational enmeshment. You cannot believe how deep it goes. So become aware. Know that your control issues, your perfectionism, your codependence, your neuroticism, anxiety, all of these things came from a root, and that root needs to be managed. That family of origin where you had to survive what you had to survive has to be put down at some point. Bewinian theory says that on a scale of 0 to 100, and this is pretty interesting, that if you don't reach a point of around 80 by the time you're around 18 years old, and on that scale of 0 to 100, it's an anxiety scale. If you are not managing your own anxiety above 80, so anything below 80, you're going to have emotional issues. The probability is you're going to have to do work, psychologically speaking, on healing your family of origin wounds, your trauma. The stage is set for you if you still manage your anxiety like your neurotic mother did when you're 30. You've got work to do. But don't worry, that's not bad news. The good news is you become aware of it, then you accept it, and then you take new action and you innovate. And the paradigm process course is exactly that, removing all 10 masks that keep us stuck and replacing those 10 masks with the power of the authentic self. That's our entire program in 10 seconds. And it works. It's worked for 24 years and it's going to work for a long time in the future. It doesn't have to be complicated. So don't feel weight, feel a sense of becoming unlimited in your relationships. That program starts with self love. And that's the biggest problem with families of origin. You were told to succeed, you were told to perform, and there was pressure, whether it was to pass the grade or look pretty for the birthday pictures or keep up with Susie, who was a great academic that lived next door. It was all there. And you had to put on those masks of perfectionism and so on to keep sane. But anything that's not authentic will not stay. So the truth needs to set you free. So now I want to tell you what this work isn't. There's a lot of talk these days about a phenomenon called family estrangement or canceling or cutting off your parents. It's a huge rising trend and It's often pretty permanent, but it's a toxic solution to relationships. Cutting off is not intimacy, it's not connection, it's not proper communication. It's a kind of twisted, toxic perfectionism, where we're again going, cycling all the way back round to my parents weren't good enough instead of I wasn't good enough. It's where the premise is wrong, the conclusion will always follow as wrong. So let's not do that. So, this family estrangement trend has nothing to do with working on your relationships. So, today, this family estrangement is coming across as self care for mental health. It's like you've got to cut off your narcissistic mother and father. Um, but what they do is none of your business if you've worked on yourself. There's your business, their business, and God's business. It's three kinds of business. So don't fall prey to family estrangement. People are saying, and therapists are saying, and coaches and your yoga teachers saying, there's complicated grief and guilt there. Um, your mother and father have generational ties to you that need to be broken in order for you to be free. But there's positive and negative ways of doing things. So the ripple effect and the generational entanglement from your parents is a fact. And it doesn't need to force you to take sides. That's called a dualistic solution. And you want to go for a non dualistic solution. It doesn't have to be either them or you. You just need to develop personal power and then practice that with both partners. That personal power can become mighty. It really can direct a relationship in any direction you intend to go, that can turn divorce around in a matter of 6 sessions. And that's research. Things like imago therapy and so on have proved it. Just look it up. It's all there. Um, it's just coming from a place of awareness first. So you don't need to isolate your parents. You don't need to cut them off. You don't need to reverse roles. You just need to become aware rather than having a cancel culture mindset, um, that is very tempting to jump at today. But that no contact rule is harsh. It's not loving. I think it's based in fear. And anything based in fear just grows. It's just a monster that lurks in the cupboard. You can sweep nothing under the carpet. So, having said that, don't cancel, communicate. Healthy boundaries are something else. Um, but what you want to do mostly is find self love, realizing that the generational ties at some point have to go. And they especially have to get out of your relationship. And even more so after that, they've got to get out of your kids' way, which is what they're going to be. They're going to be roadblocks um, that don't need to be there. So, a thought to think about is only love remains at the end of the day. All our work in relationships, even the one with ourselves, is about building awareness, acceptance, and continuously taking new action. That's the system that we all need to follow. Prioritize communication, commitment, compromise. And just remember, a successful relationship requires falling in love many, many times with the same person. Namaste.